Welcome to the first of 4 sessions which make up the Hong Kong Visa Application Roadmap series, the step-by-step guide to making any kind of Hong Kong immigration application, and used in conjunction with the extensive free resources contained in the Hong Kong Visa Handbook. My name is Stephen Barnes, co-founder of the Hong Kong Visa Centre. For our session today, we will go through how best to assess your circumstances as you think about making a Hong Kong visa application, looking particularly at your current immigration status in Hong Kong, the visa type you should be applying for, sponsorship of your application, and which method of applying you might think about adopting in your current situation. But before we start to work our way through the various sections on the roadmap document, I'd like to share with you a case example from our files which serves to illustrate why good case assessment is an absolute prerequisite before starting out down the path of a Hong Kong visa application. Our client was a Ukrainian citizen. As such, he was a 14-day visitor visa national to Hong Kong, and he was a coal mine gas extraction engineer and had been sent to Hong Kong by his employer in the Ukraine to establish a new operation with a view to marketing his firm's leading-edge coal gas extraction technology to Chinese businesses via the well-entrenched coal mining technology trading network in Hong Kong. Prior to submitting his application for a visa, he'd been coming and going between Hong Kong and China every 2 weeks, ostensibly to visit sales opportunities on the mainland, but also it suited his purposes as a de facto means of extending his visitor visa for Hong Kong. He'd rented an apartment, and 4 months or so after his first arrival, his wife and 1-year-old daughter came to join him. So, 6 months into his trip to Hong Kong, he submitted his application for an investment visa, even though he was an out-and-out employee and wasn't a shareholder in the Hong Kong company that he had established on behalf of his Ukrainian employer. As part of the application, he sought dependent visas for both his wife and his daughter. 3 weeks after his application was submitted, he received a response from the Hong Kong ID which contained a whole array of requests for information, which not only stumped him due to their number, but also their far-reaching extent. At this point, our client realized he was in over his head, and he asked us to take over the applications for him. The first problems we encountered was that he had submitted an application for the wrong type of visa. Our client had misunderstood the application forms, believing that because his company was newly established in Hong Kong, he needed to submit an application for an investment visa. While it's true that the Hong Kong ID apply elements of the investment visa provability test to a wholly new company situation such as it was in his case, the fact of the matter was that our client was actually an intercompany transferee employment visa applicant, not an investment visa applicant, and had used the wrong forms. This means that the first thing we had to do was to formally withdraw his first application and then go about submitting an employment visa application again from scratch. Normally this wouldn't have presented itself as being too much of a problem, but our client's issue was that as he was a 14-day visitor visa national, it meant that he and his young family would have to embark on the Shenzhen shuttle several more times before he could expect his employment visa to be approved. And as he had already had a passport full of 14-day visa entries to Hong Kong, it was getting hairier for him each time he ran the gauntlet of the department as he made his re-entries to Hong Kong. In short, he was desperate to get his new visa approved to put this aspect of his Hong Kong immigration experience to bed once and for all. In an effort to relieve some of this pressure on him and his family, we made an application at Immigration Tower to try to secure lengthy extensions to their visitor visas pending the final outcome of their principal visa applications. We always knew that the officer receiving the request would have the discretion to say yay or nay, and indeed he said nay to us twice. His logic was that our client had effectively been toing and froing between Hong Kong and China for several months, and that he should have made his application according to the rules, namely while he was outside of Hong Kong. Consequently, our client had inadvertently earned himself a negative prior record with the Hong Kong ID by virtue of his activities prior to him instructing us, and there was little we could do at this point to help him undo this poor profile. As it happened, our client had to undertake the Shenzhen shuttle twice more before his case was finalized, each time taking his young family with him. Not an especially pleasant state of affairs, but it all turned out to the good in the end, as we were able to get all the family's visas approved some 7 weeks after we first received our instructions. This case example really does illustrate to serve why it's important to consider the visa situation right at the outset of your activities for Hong Kong, and also to undergo a comprehensive assessment of the circumstances surrounding your plans for an application. Plan early and well, and the rest of this presentation is designed to teach you exactly how to do that, using the roadmap document as your step-by-step guide. As we work our way through the various sections on the roadmap, I'll often refer you to the specific resources contained in the Hong Kong Visa Handbook, which discuss in considerable detail the factors which you need to take into consideration in relation to the visa type that you're actually applying for. Each section will refer to different resources, so the handbook and the roadmap work together hand in hand. So, let's get started on assessment. At the top of page 2 in the roadmap, you'll find the section tabbed in blue called Assess. This contains 8 sections for consideration, and we're going to discuss each separately now. Current visa status. The starting question on the roadmap has an important bearing on the overall approach to your application. For example, if you are currently a Hong Kong ID card holding resident, in 90% of situations you'll be able to apply to change your immigration status whilst you stay in Hong Kong. However, if you are an intending resident, the situation is a little bit more problematic, with certain pros and cons as to whether you should come to Hong Kong first as a visitor and file your application while you're physically in Hong Kong, or, in the alternative, progress your application from outside of Hong Kong, seeking the correct visa approval before you ever arrive. If the former, a great deal turns on your nationality. If you are a 90-day visitor national, or indeed longer than that, perhaps 180 days if you're a British citizen, a single trip to Hong Kong lasting 90 to 180 days is usually more than adequate to cover your time in Hong Kong as you wait out the usual 6 to 8 week application consideration time frame. On the other hand, if you are a 7, 14 or even a 30-day visitor national, you will not be able to secure an extension to your visitor visa just by virtue of the fact that the Hong Kong ID are considering a residence visa application for you. This means that you're going to have to engage in the Shenzhen shuttle in order to prolong your ability to remain in Hong Kong through such a time as the Hong Kong ID finalise your residence visa application. And every time you cross the boundary, you have to independently satisfy the examining officer that you are in fact a bona fide visitor to the HKSAR. Current period of stay expiry. This question seeks to drive to the heart of the best timing for submission of your application. If you're a current resident with lots of time left on your existing limitation of stay, you should not be lulled into a false sense of security that just because your visa expires several months or even years out, there's no hurry to file your application. The reality is that as soon as the circumstances which come into play leading to your determination that you need to make an application to the Immigration Department, you need to get on with that application at the soonest moment. This is especially the case as it relates to changing jobs or starting a business in Hong Kong for the first time. All too often the necessary approvals required of the Hong Kong ID to change employers or start a new business are left until the very last moment, most often just before the expiry of current visa permissions. And these people don't realise that they are in fact breaching the conditions of stay by engaging in these unauthorised employment and businesses. This means that not only are they vulnerable to prosecution for a breach in their existing visa conditions, it makes the Immigration Department view any subsequent applications to get the actual visa permissions they need negatively from the get-go. If you're a non-resident, the question is a lot easier to answer, for, as we've just discussed, the Immigration Department will not give you any benefit in relation to your visitor status resulting from the actuality of you having a residence visa application under consideration by them. But the general principle holds true. File your application at the earliest possible moment, anticipating a shorter time to case finalisation and reducing the time where you might be tempted to breach your conditions of stay in Hong Kong as a visitor by engaging in activities which require the permissions contained in the visa for which you're actually applying. Family arrangements. Hong Kong makes it very easy for family members to accompany their principal visa holding dependents to Hong Kong, and in fact afford family adult dependent visa holders the right to work or join in a business with very little fuss after their visa approvals have been granted. Permanent residents have greater visa privileges in relation to their dependents, but the general rule is that a family member will be able to secure a dependent visa if they are a spouse or an unmarried child under the age of 18. Unfortunately, de facto spouses and same-sex partners are not eligible for dependent visas, so they need to undergo a separate process seeking prolonged visitor visa permissions instead. So, where there is a marriage and dependent children under 18 accompanying the principal visa applicant, the main challenge is to show that the family will have a roof over their head and are able to put food on the table without the need to rely on the resources of the government. Applications can be lodged together or separately, both inside and outside of Hong Kong, but again, note our earlier discussions in relation to your nationality and the amount of time you receive each time you come to Hong Kong as a visitor. Prior immigration record in Hong Kong. At this point in the case assessment exercise, thought should be given to your status as an applicant before the Hong Kong Immigration Department. For example, if you've never made an application to the department previously, in a sense you're virgin turf, and as such you have an opportunity to make a very good first impression, not only with the quality of your documentation and your general case preparations, but also how efficiently you deal with the requisitions of the Immigration Department while your case is under active consideration. In essence, you can help yourself by helping them. On the other hand, if you have made an application to the Hong Kong ID previously, they have a file on you, and thus, in many respects, the script is pretty much written as to your background, personal circumstances, and all manner of other determinations about who you are and what your rationale for being in Hong Kong has been in the past. Consequently, in assessing the approach to your next application, consideration must be given as to what the Immigration Department already know about you and how you might best factor this into your argument in covering supporting representations this time around. Another key consideration is that the nature of your prior dealings with the Hong Kong ID. Have you been denied a visa previously? Have you been caught breaching your conditions of stay before? Could your record of prior dealings with the Immigration Department be construed as generally positive, negative, or indeed non-existent? The Director of Immigration undertakes his duties with a broad discretion availed to him under the provisions of the Immigration Ordinance. The officers which work for him are well paid, wholly professional, service oriented and do an amazing job. It's a good faith environment across the board, and you should appreciate this as you make yourself ready for your dealings with the Hong Kong ID. Rationale for wanting to stay in Hong Kong. Under Hong Kong immigration law, with the particular exception of the Quality Migrant Admission Scheme, there are no pro forma visa classes. What this means is that the Hong Kong ID issue visas to foreign nationals predicated on their rationale for taking up residence in Hong Kong. For example, people coming to study get student visas, people coming to work, employment visas, those coming to establish or join in a business get an investment visa. It's only the QMAS program which provides a come because of who you are visa permission, and so consequently the visa you get delimits what you're allowed to do. In this regard then, each visa type has a specific approvability test which must be addressed. For example, if you're coming for employment, you must possess special skills, knowledge and experience of value to and not readily available in Hong Kong. Or, if you wish to join in a business, you must be in a position to make a substantial contribution to the economy of Hong Kong. In the case of accompanying family members, interestingly enough, the dependent visa which is issued is subject to proof of dependency, which effectively means that you have to show that the family will get a roof over its head and will be able to have food on its table. But as soon as the visa is granted, the holder can undertake any kind of activity in Hong Kong without any further reference to the Hong Kong ID, a great visa status to have. Specific details in respect of the rationale and visa types applicable can be found in the Prepare Your Case and Visa Information sections of the Hong Kong Visa Handbook. Sponsorship of your application. The question of sponsorship is tied directly to the visa type you're applying for. Some visa types and classes of immigration status call for a sponsor and others do not. Although all applications certainly benefit from having local supporters who can testify to the positive benefits for Hong Kong if a specified foreign national is granted permission to take up residence here. As is the case in most things, references always help. At its base level, sponsorship of an application means that the Hong Kong ID can have the cost of repatriating or removing a foreign national from Hong Kong reimbursed by the sponsor in the event that anything goes wrong with the residency for any reason. Whilst the sponsorship obligation is a very real one, in my 20 years of doing Hong Kong immigration cases, I've not yet encountered a single instance where the Hong Kong ID have called upon a sponsor to pony up the cost of an expat removal. This doesn't mean to say it's never happened, just that it is a very rare event indeed. The details of who should, could or usually serves as a sponsor in respect of each visa class is discussed in the Preparing Your Case, Visa Information and Discussion sections of the Hong Kong Visa Handbook. Visa type under consideration. When thinking about the visa type you believe you should be applying for, the key is, as we've already seen, to look to the rationale for wanting to stay in Hong Kong. In almost every case, the visa type in play is really very much cut and dried from the outset. However, there are some instances where the benefit of experience can help steer an intending applicant not to make a mistake in the choice of visa to apply for. Two typical scenarios present themselves, and these are: should I seek a foreign domestic helper visa for my girlfriend to come and live with me in Hong Kong? And can I self-employ and self-sponsor myself by working in my own company? The quick answers to these questions are really no, no. It would be a serious error of judgment to make a raft of misrepresentations to the Hong Kong ID about the real motivations for you sponsoring a foreign domestic helper visa for your girlfriend, who is unable to secure any other form of residence visa in her own right. You could both quite literally end up in jail for this, and, in this case, I've definitely seen it happen. As to the self-employed employee, the reality is that if you have your own business in Hong Kong, the investment visa is the visa for you, not the employment visa, even though the investment visa is a lot more onerous in respect of approval. If you couch your application as an employment visa, when the Hong Kong ID pull back the fabric of ownership of the sponsoring business vehicle, they'll eventually find their way to you, even if you are using nominees, and so if the business is a newly established one, they'll subject your application to the same rigour as that reserved for an investment visa application nonetheless. So it makes no sense to try to fudge the issue seeking to dress your investment visa activities up as employment visa ones. Again, detailed information in respect of each visa type can be found in the Preparing Your Case, Visa Information and Discussion sections of the Hong Kong Visa Handbook, so please go and have a look there. Submission approach. As we've seen in the early section of the roadmap in respect of current visa status and current period of stay expiry, the question of how to submit your application is closely aligned with your nationality and your ability to sit out the waiting period in Hong Kong as a visitor while the Hong Kong ID consider your application. The best advice in this respect is as follows. If you're a 90-day or more visitor visa national, applying for your residence visa whilst you're a visitor in Hong Kong is a viable tactic, although it's vital that you do not engage in any activities which are not commensurate with your visitor visa permissions as your application process plays itself out. Namely, don't start working for your sponsoring employer until the Hong Kong ID has said it's okay to do so, and that will only be after they've granted you the visa. If you are a 30-day or less visitor visa national, I'd urge caution about submitting your application whilst you're in Hong Kong. It's much better to apply from outside of Hong Kong and let the consideration process play itself out whilst you're in your home country. This will mean that you do not have to keep running the gauntlet of the Shenzhen shuttle each time your current visitor visa limited period of stay expires, and therefore it's worth remembering that the officers at the entry and exit points of Hong Kong do not have access to your visa application information at Immigration Tower, so they'll assess your bona fides as a visitor based only on what is presented to them at the boundaries. This means sufficient funds, a confirmed ticket out of Hong Kong, and a compelling explanation for why you would not be otherwise tempted to breach your conditions of stay as a visitor. Of course, some types of visa mean that the application can only be submitted whilst you're outside of Hong Kong, for example the Admission of Mainland Talents programme, and some where you absolutely must be in Hong Kong on the day you submit, for example an application for the right of abode. In this respect, please refer to the Preparing Your Case, Visa Information, How to Apply and Discussion sections found in the Hong Kong Visa Handbook. So, that concludes part 1 of the 4-part series on the Hong Kong visa application roadmap. Please remember, if you have any questions relating to your applications, simply go to our blog, write them up on a no-name basis, and we'll endeavour to give you a podcast answer via our blog within 48 hours, all part of the service and completely free of charge to members of our mailing list. You will receive the second of our emails with part 2 of the visa application roadmap tomorrow. You have more than enough to be thinking about for one day. Next time we'll be looking at case preparation, drilling down on the challenges presented by the various approvability tests, the way to be thinking about constructing your case arguments where required, and how to go about making a SWOT analysis of your case situation, all dovetailing, of course, with the substantial free resources contained in the Hong Kong Visa Handbook. Until then, I shall bid you farewell. Talk to you tomorrow.